It started like any other winter evening, the kind where the cold feels heavier than the air itself, where the darkness presses against the windows and shadows move just a little too long across the walls. My name is Emma, and this happened almost 10 years ago, when I was living alone in a small Victorian house on Hollow Street, a place that looked charming in the daylight, with its peeling paint, creaking shutters, and overgrown garden. But at night, it had a way of making the house feel like it was breathing in the dark. I had just moved in after inheriting it from my late aunt, who had passed under mysterious circumstances no one ever really talked about. The first few nights were quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that makes your ears ache and your own breathing sound intrusive. I had settled into a routine, unpacking boxes, setting up my furniture, and trying to make the place feel like home. But on the third night, I began to notice things I couldn't explain. The first time I heard it, I told myself it was the house settling, that the wind was sneaking through the cracks, that maybe I was imagining it. But it was more than that. A soft, almost rhythmic tapping, like footsteps on the floor above me, when I knew I was completely alone. I froze in the living room, heart hammering, listening. The sound would pause, then resume, slow and deliberate, coming closer to the staircase. I tried to convince myself it was the old wood creaking, but then came a faint whisper, almost unintelligible, that seemed to echo directly in my ears, a voice that didn't belong to anyone I knew, saying something I couldn't quite make out, a name maybe, or a warning. I didn't move for what felt like an eternity, straining my ears, trying to pinpoint it. Then I heard it again, clearer this time. My own name, Emma, whispered slowly, deliberately, almost lovingly, but underneath it there was a sharp edge, something that made my skin crawl. I wanted to run, but my legs were frozen, and as I turned toward the staircase, I saw the shadow first, an elongated shape stretching across the wall, twisting unnaturally, moving against the dim light of the lamp I had left on. I blinked, and it vanished, but the whisper remained, drifting through the air like smoke, circling me. I grabbed a flashlight and decided to check the second floor, heart in my throat, flashlight trembling in my hands. The stairs groaned under my weight, each step echoing through the house like a cannon shot. At the top, the hallway stretched in darkness, and the doors to the bedrooms stood slightly ajar, though I knew I had closed them. I approached the first door and called out softly, "Hello?" No answer. The air felt thick, colder than the rest of the house, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. I opened the door slowly, flashlight scanning the room, and everything seemed normal. Bed neatly made, dust motes dancing in the weak beam, nothing out of place. But then the whisper returned, closer, right behind me, almost brushing against my ear, saying again, "Emma!" I spun around, flashlight swinging wildly, but the room was empty. My heart pounded, sweat trickling down my spine. I wanted to scream, but the sound stuck in my throat. I backed into the hallway, and that's when I noticed it. Footprints. Bare, pale, almost translucent, leading from the far end of the hall toward me, as though someone, or something, had walked there, but I hadn't seen anyone. The prints didn't belong to me. They stopped at my feet, and I felt a pressure in the air, like a hand pressing against my shoulder. I whipped around, flashlight slicing through the dark, and for a brief second I saw her. My aunt, or a figure that looked exactly like her, standing at the end of the hallway, eyes black, empty, yet focused directly on me. She smiled, but it wasn't the warm, comforting smile I remembered from my childhood. It was twisted, sharp, predatory, like she knew something I didn't. I stumbled back, tripping over the rug, and the figure dissolved into mist, leaving only the whisper in my ears, "You shouldn't be here." I ran down the stairs, fumbling with the front door, almost colliding with a wall, and burst outside into the freezing night, slamming the door behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached the street, lights from neighboring houses cutting through the darkness, though eerily, every neighbor's house was dark that night. I called a friend, my voice trembling so badly I could barely form words. I told her what happened, and she tried to rationalize it, suggesting sleep deprivation, the stress of moving, maybe a nightmare. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that. I returned to the house only the next morning, in daylight, telling myself that I had imagined everything. The hallway looked ordinary, no footprints, no sign of anyone having been there, but the air felt heavy, almost expectant, and in the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something move. Weeks passed, and the occurrences grew, doors opening and closing on their own, whispers echoing in the walls at night, lights flickering with no explanation, and always the shadow at the end of the hallway, watching. I started sleeping in the living room, doors locked, lamps on, but even there I felt the pressure of unseen eyes. I researched my aunt's death, thinking maybe there was a history here. The coroner's report had vague wording, mentioning accidental circumstances, but neighbors whispered about strange noises coming from the house, about a candlelight vigil gone wrong, about screams no one could explain. I tried to leave the house, stayed elsewhere, but the dreams followed me. Dark hallways, her face, whispering my name. Eventually, I realized she wasn't gone. She was still here, tied to the house, to the rooms I had inherited. And the house itself, it wasn't just a building. It was a living thing, a keeper of memories, of regrets, and of the dark, twisted remnants of what my aunt had left behind. I tried calling priests, paranormal investigators, even psychics, but none could give me a definitive answer. They all said the house had a presence, that something was attached to it, something that fed off fear, something that had marked me. It became part of my life, every creak, every whisper, every shadow, a reminder that I wasn't alone. Years passed, and I learned to coexist, moving with caution, never letting myself be vulnerable in that house, never trusting the silence. Even now, when I walk down Hollow Street at night, I feel the weight of her eyes on me, feel the whisper curling around my ears, and I know. She's still waiting, always waiting, and the house will never let me go. After months of cautiously living in the house on Hollow Street, trying to convince myself that maybe the shadows, the whispers, the cold pressures weren't real, I began to realize the terror wasn't limited to the night. It had seeped into the day, hidden in corners, in the reflection of mirrors, in the pattern of dust motes drifting through sunlight. One morning, as the frost clung to the edges of the window panes and my coffee steamed in the kitchen, I noticed something odd. Tiny scratches along the baseboards, shallow but deliberate, almost claw-like, not there the day before. I ran my fingers over them, heart thumping, convinced it was some animal, perhaps a stray cat, but the marks led in a trail, a path that circled the entire main floor, ending directly in front of the staircase to the second floor. And that's when I heard it again. The whisper, low and indistinct, weaving through the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a passing car outside. "Emma," it said, but this time it was layered, as if multiple voices had combined into one, stretching the syllables into a slow, haunting drawl that made my skin crawl and my stomach twist. I froze, the coffee slipping from my hands and spilling across the counter, pooling near the edge, ignored, because every ounce of rational thought was consumed by the awareness that something unseen had moved in the house while I had been awake, while I had been thinking the day was ordinary. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was imagination, stress, sleep deprivation, any excuse I could find, but the scratching grew louder, now not just along the baseboards, but coming from the floor above me, synchronized with soft thumps that sounded like footsteps pacing deliberately, slowly, a rhythm designed to unsettle. I climbed the stairs cautiously, gripping the railing as though it were my lifeline, and at the top I paused, breath fogging in the cold air, realizing the hallway was darker than it should have been, the shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls, reaching for the closed doors as though trying to pull them into the darkness. I turned my flashlight on, sweeping its beam from wall to wall, and saw something that made me stumble back, a reflection, not my own, in the glass of a framed painting that hung crookedly. A figure crouched there, pale, with hollow eyes that seemed to glint with malicious intent, staring directly at me, yet when I blinked, it vanished, leaving only the whisper behind, closer now, circling me like smoke. "You shouldn't be here!" My pulse pounded, echoing in my ears as if the house itself had synchronized with it, amplifying it, making it impossible to ignore. I retreated down the stairs, hoping to escape, and as I reached the kitchen, the lights flickered violently, plunging me into darkness for a second so complete that I could feel the black pressing against my eyes, suffocating, tangible, as though I could reach out and touch it. Then the whisper escalated into words, clear this time, taunting, almost conversational. "Do you see me?" "I see you. I've always seen you." I froze mid-step, every hair on my arms standing, and my ears straining to locate the source. Nothing was there, yet I felt the pressure again, against my shoulder, against the small of my back, as if someone had stepped into my personal space. The scratching followed me, moving faster now, like it had learned my pattern, anticipating each step I took. I ran to the front door, yanking it open, expecting relief in the open night, but the cold air that hit me was not comforting. It felt deliberate, heavy, almost malevolent, and then I saw the shadow, long, stretched along the sidewalk in the dim glow of the street lamp, moving fluidly, impossibly, defying natural movement. It stopped abruptly when I looked directly at it, and in that instant I felt the entire house watching me, walls alive with attention, the whisper forming sentences in a voice both my aunt's and not. "You cannot leave. You belong here now." My legs buckled, and I fell to the snow-covered grass outside, trembling, watching the shadow retreat just enough to lure me back inside. I knew instinctively I had no choice, that the house was a trap, a cage with walls lined with memory and malice. That night, I barricaded myself in my bedroom with every piece of furniture I could move, but the whisper followed me, seeping through the cracks, under the door, curling around my ears and throat like smoke. I couldn't sleep, could barely breathe, and when I tried to leave in the morning, I found the driveway blocked, not by any physical barrier, but by an oppressive, invisible weight, as though the house itself had grown roots and arms to hold me within. Days turned into nights, nights into weeks, and the activity intensified. Objects moving when I wasn't looking, mirrors reflecting figures behind me, always behind me, shadows that lingered at the edge of my vision, whispers that became conversations, arguments, screaming, laughter, the voice of a child calling my name from rooms I had no memory of entering. I tried contacting authorities, friends, even paranormal investigators, but no one would stay overnight, no one would confront the house, and eventually, I learned the truth. My aunt had been involved in something dark, something that bound her to this house, something that now included me. The whispers were not random. They were messages, warnings, tests, an invitation or a trap I had walked into willingly by moving in. I documented everything, wrote down every sound, every movement, every word, but even my notes betrayed me, the ink smearing inexplicably, pages curling as if in reaction to the presence, letters rearranging themselves into warnings I couldn't have written. Do not trust the walls, do not sleep, do not listen. I realized the house fed on attention, on fear, on the recognition of its existence. I had to find a way to survive, to coexist, to leave without provoking it, but every exit felt uncertain, every shadow a potential assassin, every whisper a calculation. One evening, I ventured to the attic, the source of the heaviest activity, where my aunt's belongings remained untouched for years. Dust swirled in the light of my flashlight, furniture draped in yellowed sheets, boxes of journals and old photographs stacked haphazardly. I picked up one of the journals, pages brittle, handwriting jagged and erratic, describing events, rituals, sightings, and finally her descent, her obsession, her belief that the house itself was alive, and that it demanded a guardian. I realized with a chilling clarity that she had not left this world completely. She was part of the house now, and by inheriting it, by stepping into her shoes, I had become the next guardian. I dropped the journal as a cold gust of wind slammed the attic door behind me, and for the first time I heard a full voice, clear and human, echoing through the house. "Welcome home, Emma." The shadows pressed closer, moving faster, encroaching on the edges of my flashlight beam, and I understood then that there was no escape, only survival, only careful navigation of the whispers, the shadows, the watching. I have stayed in that house for years, documenting, observing, trying to remain unnoticed by the presence, but it is always there, waiting, patient, always patient, testing me with the softest of touches, the faintest of sounds, and the longest of nights. And I know, as I write this now, that I am being watched, my words monitored, my thoughts felt, and I realize with horror that the story does not end, for the house never stops, and the shadows never sleep. By now, months had passed in the house, and the nights had grown unbearable. I had grown accustomed to the faint scratching behind the walls, the occasional whisper that sounded almost like my name but never quite right, and the cold draughts that carried scents of something wet and earthy, something that did not belong to the living world. I avoided mirrors, knowing that every reflection could reveal more than my own face, an extra shadow, a flicker of movement behind me that my mind tried desperately to rationalize but could never explain. The attic had become my forbidden place. Even when I slept, I dreamt of the boxes of journals, the faces of people I had never met staring from photographs with hollow eyes that followed me wherever I moved. One night, I awoke to the faint sound of someone breathing in my bedroom. It was shallow, slow, deliberate, and I could hear it coming from the corner where no one could physically be. The bed seemed too heavy with its own weight, the sheets cold against my skin, and when I turned my head, I saw it, eyes, hundreds of them, reflecting the dim glow of the streetlight outside, peering from every shadow, from the curtains, from the walls themselves. My heart raced, but I could not move. I could not scream. The breathing intensified, now accompanied by soft murmurs, like 1,000 tiny voices speaking at once, forming phrases I could almost understand. "You belong here. You cannot leave. The house remembers." I backed away slowly, my fingers brushing against the wall, which felt wet and pulsing, alive. My phone, my lifeline to the outside world, had no signal. Every call I tried to make ended in static, each text disappeared before sending, and the batteries of my flashlight drained in seconds, leaving me in a darkness that was thick, almost tactile. Then came the footsteps, soft at first, pacing around the perimeter of the room, moving counter to my movements, always behind me, never directly confronting, yet impossibly close. I could feel the vibrations in the floorboards, the subtle shaking beneath my bare feet. I ran to the door, flinging it open, but the hallway stretched farther than it should have, distorted, elongated, twisting in impossible ways. The portraits on the wall, faces of ancestors, family members long dead, were no longer lifeless. Their eyes moved, tracking me, their mouths opening in silent screams that twisted into smiles when I blinked. I stumbled back, tripping over the rug, and fell into the study where my aunt's journals lay scattered on the floor as though something had been rifling through them while I slept. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and decay, and when I bent to pick up a journal, a hand, pale and skeletal, shot out of the shadows and grazed my shoulder, leaving a sting that burned like acid. I screamed, finally breaking the paralysis, but the sound was swallowed by the house, absorbed into the walls, as if it had never happened. I turned on my flashlight again, only to find the figure that had touched me standing at the far end of the room, impossibly tall, thin, its face obscured by a black veil that moved as though alive. It tilted its head, and I could feel the weight of its gaze like a physical force pushing me to my knees. "You cannot leave," it whispered in a voice that sounded simultaneously male and female, old and young, human and not. My body trembled uncontrollably, every instinct screaming at me to flee, yet the door I had come through now opened into a room I did not recognize, a room that had never existed before in the house, with walls painted in shades of red and black that seemed to pulse alive, and the air felt wet, heavy with the scent of iron and rot. I backed away, stepping on something soft, something that squirmed beneath my foot, and realized with horror that it was not a toy, not a piece of discarded cloth, but something living, writhing in shadows, slipping between the cracks of the floorboards, pooling into dark puddles that reflected faces, hundreds of faces, screaming silently. I tried to retreat, but the hallway behind me had disappeared completely, replaced by a void, a black nothing that seemed to stretch into infinity. I could feel whispers crawling over my skin, into my hair, wrapping around my wrists, tightening like ropes. The shadowed figure advanced slowly, deliberately, and every step it took left the floorboard smoking, leaving a smell of charred flesh that made me gag. I tried to scream again, but no sound came out, only the rising chorus of whispers repeating my failures, my fears, my secrets, every thought I had ever tried to bury coming alive and taunting me. And then, suddenly, silence fell, suffocating, absolute, the weight lifting just enough that I could breathe again. In that silence, a single voice whispered, "Look." My eyes, strained and raw, followed the direction of the voice to the fireplace, where I had once felt comfort in its glow. But the fire was gone. In its place, a hole, black as the void outside, pulsed gently, almost beckoning, almost inviting. From it, I could hear the faintest echo of my own name, distorted, calling me into a place I did not want to go but knew I could not resist. The figure remained, motionless, watching, patient, and in that moment I realized with a bone-deep certainty that I was trapped, that the house was not a place I lived in but a living entity, waiting for me to surrender fully, to step into its maw willingly. And though I backed away, heart hammering, every instinct screaming to escape, the pull was irresistible, magnetic, and I knew that this night was only the beginning. The shadows would follow, always, and the whispers would never end, because the house was hungry, and it had claimed me. The night stretched on, unrelenting, each second heavier than the last, as though time itself had been swallowed by the house, and I could feel it pressing in from every direction, alive and patient, waiting for me to falter. The shadows from the corners of the room crept closer, thickening, twisting into forms I could almost recognize, shapes of people, distorted and wrong, their faces flickering like candle flames in the wind, their eyes hollow but burning, and I realized with a sudden, sickening clarity that every step I had taken in the house, every creak of the floor, every draft I had ignored, had been guiding me here, into this waking nightmare where walls breathed and ceilings shifted imperceptibly, and the air itself was dense with whispers I could no longer distinguish from thought, as though the house had learned my mind, knew every fear I carried, every secret I had buried, and now it was speaking them back to me in a chorus of voices, each one layered over the other, until I could not tell which were mine and which were not, and I stumbled backward, hands outstretched, finding nothing solid, only the cold, wet wall that seemed to pulse beneath my touch, like a heartbeat that was not my own, and the smell hit me then, metallic and thick, like blood soaking into old wood, and I gagged, head spinning. But there was no time to pause because the shadowed figure, impossibly tall and thin, gliding rather than walking, had moved closer, and though its veil still obscured its face, I could feel its eyes boring into me, its presence dragging at my spine with invisible claws, and I tried to speak, to demand it leave, to make it real and therefore defeatable, but my mouth refused, my voice swallowed by the oppressive, suffocating dark, leaving only the whispers and the heartbeat of the walls, and then I saw it. The floor beneath me had begun to shift, opening like the maw of some great beast, revealing a staircase descending into darkness that smelled of rot, of soil and decay, and though every rational thought screamed to flee, to run from this house that had become a predator, some part of me, the part that had always been curious, that had always wondered what lay just beyond the veil of the ordinary, compelled me forward, step by trembling step, the shadowed figure following, its silence deafening, and as I descended, the darkness thickened, wrapping around me like a cloak, until the walls themselves became liquid black, and I could see faces swirling within them, screaming, reaching, and the voices of the house now spoke in my own tongue, mocking, coaxing, telling me that I had always been expected, that every choice, every path I had taken, had been leading to this staircase, to this descent, to the point where I would stand at the threshold of the house's true form, a cathedral of darkness, vast and infinite, with ceilings vanishing into nothing and floors that seemed to stretch endlessly, alive with writhing shadows that hissed my name and laughed at my fear, and I could feel the air vibrating with anticipation as the veil lifted slightly, revealing glimpses of what lay beyond. A world of pale, starving figures, half-formed and grotesque, crawling and clawing at each other, and in their midst, the shadowed figure finally lowered its veil, revealing a face that was mine, and not mine, twisted in ways that made my stomach heave, eyes blackened, teeth jagged and yellowed, mouth splitting into a grin that mirrored my own deepest fears, and a voice, my voice yet wrong, echoed through the chamber, "You are home. You have come where you belong." My knees buckled, and I wanted to run, to leap back up the stairs, but the staircase had vanished, the house bending impossibly, folding space around me, walls closing in, ceilings lowering, and I realized with finality that there was no escape, that I had been chosen, that my curiosity had been my undoing, and in a final surge of desperation, I swung the axe I had brought in a moment of instinct, shattering the shadowed figure before me into a cloud of darkness that scattered across the room, like smoke in the wind. But even as it dissipated, the voices remained, multiplied, chanting, crawling into my ears, my eyes, my thoughts, whispering promises of what would come next, and the walls began to breathe faster, moving closer, closing in, and I understood then that the house was patient, eternal, and it did not forget, and though I tried to scream, the sound never left my throat, and the last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me entirely was a reflection in the black floor, a mirror image of myself, grinning that terrible, impossible smile, and I knew that some part of me had already been claimed, and the house would wait, as it always does, for the next curious soul to stumble inside, to follow the whispers, to descend the stairs, to become another layer of its memory, trapped forever in its walls, a story folded into the shadows, and as the blackness swallowed me completely, I realized that fear is not momentary. It is eternal, it lingers in the corners of a room, in the flicker of a light, in the cold draft that brushes your skin, because some places, some houses, remember everything, and they never, ever let go.